Now tell me, what do you think of the concept of a monarchy? There are probably two answers being made by the watchers of this video. It's a really crappy system of government, and it's tied very closely to the fantasy genre, which is why we use in D&D. And maybe three of you are thinking of that one Mega Man meme from when the Queen dies.
There is no Easter Bunny, there is no Tooth Fairy, and there is no Queen of England.
Funny every time. So monarchy, where do we even start? I guess with how I run games. I tend to avoid one centralized government in my settings. Instead, I kind of have monsters make controlling large chunks of land really hard. So kingdoms tend to be like a city and the surrounding farmland, maybe 3 cities if you're really big. If you want more than that, you're going to need to have a really big and really loyal army, which is why everyone's scared of necromancers. This setup is not historically accurate, but how do I become a king of my great 1.5 cities? Well, by divine right, of course. Could also be just being the toughest guy, but we're gonna go with deities since it is polytheistic D&D. And I like the idea of God choosing who controls an area. So which of our polytheistic gods gets to choose, since there's like 20 of them at a minimum? I think a census would need to be taken, and you get whoever has the most followers would probably be the most natural course of action, but also maybe there's just the most effective in the area. Maybe your region has a common fear of one of them. You get the idea. And then that god will probably choose a priest or a qualified hero. Might go through something else, maybe a rigorous and dangerous testing process. Maybe he just plops a monster down somewhere and says, okay, whoever slays it gets to take over. That could be fun. So once you do this, the new ruler is crowned and his family have a literal divine right to rule. Now we will need to have this group respect any rules that the god has put into place, otherwise we might void our right. This is similar to historically where you tried to get them to break some rules, that way you could get the church involved when you're overthrowing, because if you can get the Pope to say, yeah, he voided his right, you're in a pretty good spot. I'm not going to go into heavy detail because when you do polytheism, you get too many different groups, but solid chance the god has a Leviticus-style book of law everyone needs to read. The king should also probably make sure their children follow these rules, but oops, they didn't. Let's hope they don't screw up when I die of disease. Also, I'm not sure where to put this, but you could theoretically lie about the divine right. Could even partner with like a wizards or some demons to produce a false god to give me the right. And that could make for an interesting concept. Okay, king dies of disease and I didn't spend much time teaching. What happens? Well, while the king might have screwed up, maybe the god can step in and help out. In fact, the direct line might even be effective enough that the deity acts as a father figure to the entire royal family. Or we could go for a goddess motherly figure. So as long as no one questions the deity, it's going to make for a fairly effective line as long as that deity is capable of teaching the next king, as opposed to only one break resulting in the next one being screwed up instantly that you get in historical monarchies. I guess we are assuming that the god is effective and that another deity or cult isn't working to overthrow the king. Of course, this is ignoring a very important detail. Even with a direct line, the king could still get into conflict with the deity and decide, no, I'm doing it my way. And if people aren't immediately screwed over by that, they might not even object to this. Remember, at this point, several generations have passed from whenever that theoretical census took place, and the current residents might even have converted to a new religion, and that's why they're shifting over. So this could turn a divine rule into a more traditional monarchy, except now you're testing that deity's wrath. Good luck with that. I'm gonna move on to my next bullet point. With humans, you get a king, they live till they're like 30, he hasn't taught his son anything, and he dies of dysentery. But if we do say an elvish king, then the prince that's destined to be a king could have 50 years of childhood, 50 years to explore the world, and come back with a century and still have another century to learn to rule effectively. And the father could even still be a useful councilman for a century after that. You have a lot of time to spend learning to do things, as opposed to humans who probably need to pick up the traits in a year, maybe 3. But most kingdoms in D&D tend to be men. Why is that? I think I've seen seen the explanations of, say, ambition, but I'm gonna go for men are the best warriors. It's just easier to gather an army of men to take over an area. And since they aren't particularly mean to other races, it's easier for an elf to live among them than establish their own zone. Of course, we could also say that maybe elves do the exact same things humans do. They just have to spend a lot more time whenever they want to repopulate, because remember, you're waiting a century before you consider an elfin adult. So humans got that strong head start, and maybe elves will eventually take them all over. Could even be a fun point of conflict that human kingdoms are concerned that elf kingdoms are gonna conquer them. And you can get a head start on that conflict by subscribing down below. I will not be replaced by an elf anytime soon. I also like the concept of kings figuring out how to delay death. You need a pretty rich king, but once you have that seed money, you can start searching for ways to delay your aging. I kind of picture a fountain of youth. In some cases, eternal life could also just be a blessing. Once again, we got that divine right. Fun fact, Caesar kind of joined Olympus in some versions of the myths. Or in some cases, a king could be a literal dragon or lich. In these cases, I picture the king being experienced and is probably better at being king than other groups. Because once you have, like, say, a decade of experience, you should be pretty good at maintaining that. So first decade, I imagine, is probably where the most opportunity to overthrow such a king lingers. And then after that, for the king, it becomes essentially a tycoon game. And much like a tycoon game, the king does get great wealth. Where is this going? I think magic, at least for the most part, needs to be funded by him. Magic is expensive, and in addition to the potential for a longer rule from surviving, the king might be wanting resurrecting diamonds, advisors, and research towards projects that might make him more prosperous. They could very much become sort of like a lot of scientists that are working for the government because the government funds their research, and that's how magic kind of starts shaping out. I also imagine if we stick with the Holy Monarchy, a lot of money could be going to churches. These buildings could be covered in gold, silver, gems. They could even become a common spot for thieves, or just become how visitors know how well off a town is, just how rich are their churches. So now, in my mind, I have less of a monarchy and more of a holy empire. My bad, drifting happens a lot when I write. So how does it fall apart? If it's generational, you know exactly how it falls apart. A slightly worse ruler becomes a bad one, then a worse one, but long-lived rulers can seem untouchable sometimes, but I think that first glance is wrong, because they become complacent. So much time and wealth can develop egos, insecurities, boredom. Eventually, the love of the rule may drift, which they can give up voluntarily, but more likely they become flawed, and those flaws lead to the kingdom's failure. Thank you. You can watch whatever that is.